Today we are going to be tackling Isabel Wilkerson's Caste, the Origins of Our Discontents.
Oh, yeah, this is a fascinating one.
It really is. This book, it really challenges, this idea of the American dream.
Welcome to Mindful Moments. Today, we challenge a deeply ingrained belief, the idea of American exceptionalism. What if the land of the free has a hidden structure, a hierarchy as rigid as any in history? Prepare to explore the unsettling parallels between America and ancient caste systems.
So Wilkerson, she argues that America, for all of its ideals about freedom and equality, it actually operates on a caste system. And she's not just talking about social inequality or class differences, right?
Yeah.
She's talking about like a rigid inherited hierarchy.
Yeah, it's a pretty challenging idea.
It is.
It is one that forces us to really look beyond, kind of the surface and confront some uncomfortable truths about our nation's past and present.
Absolutely. And to kind of like illustrate this point, she outlines 8 pillars of caste systems found across societies, and she argues that they're mirrored in America.
Interesting.
And the first one might surprise you: divine will and natural law.
Okay, so throughout history, caste systems have often been justified as being, divinely ordained or reflecting a natural order.
Right.
Like, think about how this played out in America, with the use of biblical interpretations to justify slavery.
Yeah, it's unsettling to see how scripture was twisted to serve certain agendas.
Yeah.
Wilkerson, she even gives the example of how some interpreted the story of Noah
Right.
and his son Ham to support the idea that people of African descent were destined for servitude.
Right, yeah. These deeply ingrained beliefs, they really help to solidify the hierarchy in people's minds.
Of course.
It wasn't just about power and control. It was about creating a belief system that made the inequality seem inevitable, even, divinely sanctioned.
Right, and that leads us to the second pillar, heritability.
Okay.
The idea that caste is something you're born into, passed down through generations, impacting social and economic mobility.
Right.
And this wasn't just a social norm.
Right.
This was actually enshrined in law.
So in colonial America, a child inherited the past of their mother.
Wow.
And this had lasting ramifications, creating a system where upward mobility was incredibly difficult, if not impossible, for those born into the lower caste.
And Wilkerson, she highlights a shocking historical law, stating that children born to enslaved women were automatically enslaved as well,
Wow.
regardless of who their father was.
Yeah.
It's a stark example of how the system was designed to maintain the hierarchy and prevent any mixing of the castes.
And this idea of maintaining the purity of the dominant caste brings us to the third pillar, endogamy.
Okay.
The practice of marrying only within your designated social group.
Right.
This was strictly forbidden in many societies, including America.
And Wilkerson doesn't shy away from the brutal reality of how these laws were enforced,
Right.
citing cases of violence and even lynching. She shares the tragic story of Willie James Howard in 1944, a young black teenager who was murdered for simply sending a Christmas card to a white girl.
It's a chilling reminder of the extreme lengths people were willing to go to in order to uphold these caste boundaries.
Yeah.
And it reveals the deep-seated fear of any challenge to the established hierarchy.
And that fear of contamination from lower castes, that's at the heart of the fourth pillar. Purity versus pollution.
Yeah.
This is where the concept of caste gets really unsettling.
Wilkerson gives this really vivid example. A white mother scrubbing her daughter's hand after she touched a black child.
Wow.
And this fear, it wasn't limited to personal interactions. It was used to justify the segregation of public spaces like swimming pools.
She even describes a court case where a town tried to defend its segregated pool by claiming white residents wouldn't swim in water that had been touched by black people.
Wow.
It just illustrates how deeply ingrained this belief system was, shaping everything from social norms to legal decisions.
It's a striking example of how seemingly arbitrary distinctions were used to enforce separation and reinforce the idea of inherent differences between the castes, differences that were not based on fact, but on a constructed hierarchy.
And this rigid hierarchy also dictated one's profession, which brings us to the fifth pillar, occupational hierarchy. Wilkerson argues that the American system, especially in the South, restricted black people to manual labor and entertainment jobs, denying them access to education and skilled trades.
And this legacy continues to impact the economic disparities and opportunity gaps we see today. It's a reminder that the past isn't truly past. It shapes the present in profound ways. And, this idea of inherent differences of one group being fundamentally superior to another,
Right.
that is really central to the six-pillar dehumanization.
This is where Wilkerson draws those chilling parallels to Nazi Germany
Right.
and how they dehumanized Jewish people.
Exactly.
It's about stripping away someone's humanity, making it easier to justify mistreatment and exploitation.
Exactly. Both regimes use propaganda and fear to make it acceptable to treat entire groups of people as less than human.
Right.
It's a stark reminder of how dangerous these ideologies can become and how crucial it is to recognize the warning signs.
And Wilkerson argues that this dehumanization often manifests as violence and intimidation.
Right.
Which brings us to the seventh pillar, terror, as enforcement.
Yeah. Throughout American history, violence has been used to enforce the caste system.
Right.
Lynchings, beatings, and other forms of terror were commonplace.
Especially during the Jim Crow era.
Yeah.
Wilkerson points out that during that time, a lynching occurred every 3 or 4 days.
It's a horrifying statistic
It is.
that underscores just how deeply rooted the system of control was.
In all these pillars, all this violence and dehumanization,
Right.
it rests on that final foundational pillar.
Right.
The belief in inherent superiority versus inferiority.
That idea that one group is inherently better than another simply because of their birth. Wilkerson argues that this dynamic is still playing out in contemporary society, even if it's not as overt as it once was.
Mm-hmm.
It's reflected in unconscious bias and ingrained stereotypes about Black people
Right.
that can influence behavior, even among people who believe they are egalitarian.
Absolutely.
These subtle forms of prejudice can have a real impact on people's lives,
You do.
limiting their opportunities and reinforcing the existing hierarchy.
So we've laid out these 8 pillars, this framework for understanding caste.
Yeah.
But where do we go from here?
Yeah.
If we accept Wilkerson's premise, what are the implications? What does it mean for us as individuals and as a society?
That's the question, isn't it? Wilkerson suggests that recognizing and naming this hidden structure is the first step towards dismantling it.
Okay.
It's about becoming aware of the ways in which caste influences our thoughts, behaviors, and interactions, even when it's operating on an unconscious level.
She talks about how we internalize these caste beliefs as children, almost like learning a language. We absorb messages about who is superior and who is inferior, who deserves respect and who doesn't.
It becomes so ingrained that we often don't even question it.
Right.
It just seems like the natural order of things, but it's not natural. It's a social construct,
Right.
a system that we've created and that we can change.
But how do we begin to challenge something that feels so fundamental, so deeply embedded in our culture?
Well, Wilkerson emphasizes the importance of empathy. We need to develop a deeper understanding of the experiences of people from different caste backgrounds.
Right.
It's about listening to their stories, acknowledging their pain, and recognizing the systemic forces that have shaped their lives.
And it's also about recognizing our own position within the caste system.
Right.
And that can be a tough pill to swallow, right? Nobody wants to think of themselves as being on the side of the oppressor.
It's not about guilt or shame.
Right.
It's about taking responsibility. It's about recognizing that we've all been shaped by this system and we all have a role to play in dismantling it. It's about acknowledging that we have the power to change our thoughts and actions and to create a more equitable society.
Wilkerson offers some pretty compelling examples of what this kind of awareness can look like in action.
Yeah.
She talks about challenging dominant caste narratives and speaking up when we see injustice happening, no matter how small it may seem.
She also stresses the importance of allyship.
Right.
For people in positions of privilege to use their voices and resources to support those who are marginalized.
Yeah.
It's about working together to create a world where everyone is seen as an individual, not just a representative of their caste.
But changing hearts and minds is only part of the equation, right?
Yeah.
We also need to address the systemic and institutional structures that perpetuate caste inequality.
Absolutely. We need to examine systems like education,
Right.
healthcare, housing, and criminal justice. Dismantling policies and practices that discriminate against lower caste individuals and create barriers to opportunity. This requires a systemic approach, one that acknowledges the deep-seated nature of caste and its impact on every aspect of our society.
It's a tall order, for sure. But Wilkerson argues that it's necessary if we want to live up to the ideals of equality and justice, that America claims to stand for. It's a reminder that the work of creating a more just society is ongoing, a marathon, not a sprint.
It feels like such a monumental task, though.
Yeah.
Where do we even begin to dismantle something so ingrained, so deeply rooted in our history and culture?
Well, Wilkerson, she doesn't offer any easy answers,
Right.
but she does urge us to kind of look beyond America's borders for inspiration and insight.
Okay.
One really striking comparison she makes is between the American caste system and the caste system in India.
Oh, wow. You wouldn't necessarily think those two societies would have so much in common.
Right.
One is often seen as the land of opportunity.
Right. The other burdened by ancient traditions. But how does that comparison illuminate the challenges and potential solutions for America?
Well, what's startling is how similar the two systems are.
Hmm.
Wilkerson highlights how both rely on those same fundamental pillars,
Right.
heritability, endogamy, and the notion of purity versus pollution. Even though they developed in different contexts, they share a core logic,
Right.
a way of dividing and ranking human beings that transcends cultural boundaries.
And in both countries, religion has played a significant role in justifying and upholding the caste hierarchy.
Oh, absolutely. Think about the biblical interpretations used to support slavery in America.
Right.
And the Hindu scriptures used to reinforce the caste system in India.
Right.
It's a powerful reminder of how religion, despite its potential for promoting compassion and equality,
Right.
can be twisted to serve the interests of the powerful.
It makes you question how much of what we believe is truly based on our own values versus what we've been taught to accept as truth.
It really does. Wilkerson also draws this fascinating parallel in how both American and Indian societies have struggled with dominant group status threat.
Yeah.
This is the idea that when the dominant caste feels its power or status is being challenged, it often reacts with fear and resentment.
So you're saying events like the election of Barack Obama, the first black president, triggered anxieties within the dominant caste in America.
Precisely and similarly, the rise of Dalit activism in India, challenging the traditional caste hierarchy, has also met with resistance and backlash.
Wow, so these events disrupt the perceived natural order,
They do.
leading to pushback from those who benefit from the status quo.
Absolutely. And that underscores the need for sustained commitment to this work of dismantling the caste system.
Yeah.
It's not something that's going to happen overnight.
Of course not.
It requires constant vigilance, a willingness to confront uncomfortable truths, and a dedication to building a more just and equitable world.
So where does this leave us? What can we do with this knowledge? What concrete steps can we take to break down this system that seems so deeply ingrained in our society?
Well, Wilkerson emphasizes that the first step is awareness.
Okay.
It's about shining a light on something that has been hidden in plain sight for so long. Once we see it, once we understand how caste operates, we can begin to challenge it in our own lives and in our communities.
But awareness alone isn't enough,
Right.
right? We need to translate that awareness into action.
Exactly. It starts with individual actions.
Okay.
We can be mindful of our own biases, educating ourselves about the history and impact of caste, and speaking up against injustice when we see it. These seemingly small acts can have a ripple effect, creating change on a personal level.
But we also need to think bigger, right? How do we address those systemic issues that perpetuate inequality?
That's where collective action comes in.
Okay.
We need to advocate for policy changes that address systemic inequities in areas like criminal justice, housing, education, and healthcare. It's about creating a society where everyone has a fair shot, regardless of their caste background.
It's about shifting our values and priorities, recognizing that we're all interconnected and that we all benefit when everyone has the opportunity to thrive.
Wilkerson reminds us that dismantling the caste system is not just a moral imperative.
Yeah,
It's essential for the health and well-being of our society as a whole.
right.
A society built on hierarchy can never truly be free or just.
So what does this all mean for you? We encourage you to delve deeper into this topic by reading Isabel Wilkerson's Caste, The Origins of Our Discontents. It's a powerful and challenging book that will make you question your assumptions about America and its history.
And we invite you to continue this conversation by subscribing to our podcast and sharing this episode with your friends.
Yes.
Together, we can raise awareness about caste and work towards a more equitable future.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into Isabel Wilkerson's Caste. Until next time, keep questioning, keep learning, and keep pushing for a better world.